Welcome to the Books and Beer Book Club, coming to you from Cercis Brewing Company in Columbus, Wisconsin. We're a different kind of book club, only reading books by authors who can visit us in person or via Zoom for the discussion. We've been going strong since 2015, meeting nearly every month. We're now making these fun and informative discussions available to you on video. I'm your host, Valerie Beal. I'm an author myself, and I enjoy interviewing our guest authors and facilitating the questions from our readers both in person and on Zoom. We hope you enjoy this replay. To join us live, please check out our schedule on our Facebook page at Books and Beer Columbus.
Welcome back to the lovely Mary Behan. Yay! This is so exciting to have you back. There's a few of you who have been at the events when we talked about Abbey Girls, which is the book that she wrote with her sister about their boarding school days in Ireland. And then A Measured Thread, which was the precursor or companion novel in a way to what we're reading tonight. So this is Mary's third time being with us. And we're just glad you're willing to come on back. And that you
I love coming here.
So, but for those of you who don't know, like your bio and your background, you should maybe tell us some things like that. And I will make sure we're recording. So do you want me to give some of your bio, or do you want to do your own bio?
I'll do a quickie. In 1978, I emigrated from Ireland to the United States. Like all good Irish people, I came to America, the land of opportunity. And it was. I came to the University of Wisconsin in Madison, got a great job. I was a professor in the School of Veterinary Medicine for 30 years. I taught neuroscience, which isn't really what most first-year veterinary students want to learn anything about, but they were stuck with me. And I had a research program. I had a brilliant career. And somewhere around 2012, because I got a job with a pension, which is what my mother, when I left Ireland, had said, get a job with a pension. So I did, I had, and I retired. And shortly afterwards, my sister and I have always written letters to each other and to our parents in Ireland. That's what we did for 40 years as emigrants. My sister is in Canada. And together, we started to write letters to each other. We talk every Sunday on the phone, but we still wrote letters. And we discovered that our memories of our childhood in boarding school in Dublin, 6 years in boarding school, a very strict boarding school, we saw it totally differently. She didn't like it as much as I did, but we were in the same place at the same time, and we still went. It wasn't like that at all. So that was Abbey Girls. We published our letters, back and forth letters about everything from the dormitory to the church to confession, if you were an Irish Catholic girl in Ireland. And really, at 11, you have nothing to confess. So you make up sins, which become lies for the next confession. So in any case, that was the first book. And after we'd finished writing Abbey Girls, I was sort of bereft. I wanted to continue writing. So that's when I wrote my first novel, A Measured Thread, which is set largely in Wisconsin.
That's the cover.
But at the same time, there's a big chunk of it in Ireland. It's an older woman she's 80, and she's living in southwestern Wisconsin and looking at her future. She has no children, and she has an accident that leaves her needing to get help. The young woman she got help from during that time, she paid her. It was a young student at the university. That young woman's name is Isobel. And so when I'd finished A Measured Thread and put it aside and thought, that's it, I've done that. Isobel kept on coming back in my mind. And I wanted Isobel, I really wanted her to have a happy life. And I had left her as a frustrated, angry young woman who did not know who her real parents were because her adoptive parents wouldn't tell her. And her adoptive parents were not very affectionate towards her. And she wondered why they'd ever bothered to adopt her. So I took Isobel through a search for her real parents. And I took her to New Zealand, which is where her adoptive parents were living. And I helped her to find her way, hence finding Isobel. And in the end, I brought her back to southwestern Wisconsin and left her hopefully approaching a happy life. So that's finding Isobel.
I'm thinking that maybe the night that we had you here for a measured thread, that we were encouraging you to, we wanted Isabel's story. Are we remembering that right? Were other people asking for this too? I mean,
Yes.
It couldn't have just been our group. Clearly.
No.
Yeah.
And several people said to me, will you write a sequel? And I've known writers who have written their first book and then somebody says, but surely there'll be a sequel. And I was thinking to myself, no way am I going to write a sequel. And that was a hard job to write the first novel. I don't have it in me. And actually, COVID happened then. And I definitely didn't have it in me to write a novel during COVID. But what I did instead was write short stories. So I go to yoga in Cross Plains at the fire station with a bunch of wonderful women, my age, a few older, a few younger. We do it twice a week, and then we go to the local coffee shop and we sort out the affairs of the world very successfully, way better than anybody else. But in any case, with this group of people, when I couldn't meet them during COVID at the coffee shop, I said, how about I send you a short story every month? I've never written short stories, but sure, why not? What else am I going to do? Do yoga by myself in the living room and then write a short story. So I did this for maybe a year and a half. And their comments, there were about 12 beta readers, and their comments were wonderful. They really helped me learn how to craft good stories. And at the end of that, I published 12 of those stories in a collection called Kernels. So that was that. And then Isobel was still there. And she was churning and basically saying, what about me?
She was harassing you.
Yes. So
do you have copies of Kernels with you tonight?
I've copies of everything.
Because you mentioned the short story project, how different was it to shift from novel writing to the short stories? I mean, it's a challenge, right? But like, how did you?
COVID. The thing about I mean, most of us have forgotten it. I have literally, COVID didn't happen. But during COVID, everything was impossible, which meant that some things were possible. And that was the difference, that all the things that you realized you couldn't do, well, anything that you could do, you felt, why wouldn't I? So the first short story I wrote, I was shocked at what I'd written. And because
it was shocking? Or was the process, the fact that you finish it?
Shocking.
Oh, okay.
Because it was the story. I mean, these are my stories, but what came out wasn't me necessarily. This was, by the way, my husband is in the background. So but I wrote the story of a woman who is going to a conference in New Orleans. She's living in Chicago. She's an attorney. I don't know this person. And she has an encounter with a really interesting woman. She has a sexual encounter with a really interesting stranger whom she meets. Where did that come from? I mean, this, but there's always an element of truth. I did go to a conference in New Orleans once upon a time, and I met a woman on the street, and we had a delightful conversation. And she said to me, I have an apartment about a block away. Would you like to come over for a drink? Now, I did not have a sexual encounter with her, but I had the most amazing, interesting evening's discussion with her. And afterwards I thought, how did that happen? And so that was the kernel of that story. And then I just let my imagination go wild and thought, you can write with the voice of a young woman. You can be an old man. You can be straight. You can be gay. You can be anything. That's what COVID did for me with kernels. I could have been and was a whole bunch of other people. And whether they're good, bad, or indifferent, I had an amazing experience writing them.
Do you think that it was good practice for your writing craft and it impacted your, the quality of, say, novel writing?
Yes, because you're so limited in a short story. I'd never read about writing short stories. I had no examples, but you have 3,500 words. It's not a lot. It's 10 pages. And you want to bring somebody in, bring them through a journey, and at the end, leave them with, in my case, a tiny twist so that they go, was I really there? Did that really happen to me? That's what writing short stories left me with. That skill of thinking, it doesn't have to be the perfect beginning, middle, and end. You can put a twist in.
Right. Have you ever done like flash fiction, like short, what they consider short? It's like 1,000 words, 500 to 1,000, depends on.
I mean, I look at that as pressure. That's like going into a class where I've never been to an English class. I'm a scientist. We didn't have those. But the pressure of somebody saying, write 500 words on God knows what. I think my heart rate would increase and I would just go, oh God, no, I don't want to be put in that situation. I want the leisure, even if it's only a month, of writing a story.
I like to use like flash fiction as just like an exercise sometimes to get back into writing. So like I've had a long gap now because I'm getting books ready to go. And so I haven't had time to write. So I kind of like the idea of doing like something like that. And that's more like it's kind of more of a scene. It does have a little bit of an arc to it because it has to pull the reader in and then to like not just like, lop it off with no real conclusion. I kind of like those, but
it's a good exercise.
It's like freeing to me. Just like play with it. It doesn't have to be perfect.
So recently I was reading, there's a very well-known short story writer in the United States called George Saunders. And he answers blog questions online. I don't pay for his service. This is a freebie. But a question a couple of weeks ago from a reader of his books. He teaches writing, by the way, somewhere in New England, and he's very well respected. This person writing a question to him said, I have an arc. I know where I'm going. I have a beginning, a middle, and end. I am so ready to write this novel, and I'm not doing it, and I don't know why. And Saunders' response was really gentle. He said, in some ways, maybe you've lost the mystery of when you have no plan, when you just say, today I will write 300 words. 300 words is 2 paragraphs. And you will just start it. And whatever comes out at the end of those 300 words is your success for the day. And that's what I think flash fiction can do.
I think so. And also too, when we, depending upon where you are, like the book that you wrote with your sister was something that was a kind of different style than novel writing, right? Because you guys were comparing your experiences and it was little letters that you were writing back and forth.
Yeah.
So when you went to write A Measured Thread, maybe there wasn't as much pressure because it was your first, like full length novel. But then there's like for this person asking Saunders for assistance, like there's pressure as you go further into your career, like that it's like maybe you expect to be better at it somehow and not have, or that it's your first draft's going to like look different than your first draft of your first novel or whatever. So I think we have more expectations that we put on ourselves for like where we start from.
But there's two sides to this, because one of the things that I find has happened is I've written 4 books. It's an amazing feeling. By the way, it feels so much better than having taught veterinary medicine for 30 years.
Does it?
It does. I mean, no, I adored teaching. I really did adore teaching. But the feeling of accomplishment, it's all mine.
Yeah.
It came from somewhere in my brain, as opposed to learning a subject that I then deliver to people.
Yeah.
This is self-generated from a weird place, God knows where. So having done that, I don't feel pressure right now. By the way, I wrote 300 words this afternoon, but
on what?
So then But at the same time, it's I'm sure you feel it as well.
Yeah.
That you can do it.
Yeah, because you were afraid you've forgotten how, maybe if it's been some time since.
But you still know you can do it. Yes, which is a lovely feeling.
When Isobel was rattling around in your mind, you at the end of A Measured Thread really hadn't planned to follow her story, but she wouldn't let you go. And then also fans or readers who had enjoyed getting to know her, they wanted a resolution for her, I think. But I mean, the mystery was already there of her parents. We knew a little bit about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Was the beginning of the novel as it ended up how you initially wrote it? Because it's a really strong opening. I mean, it's a really like grab you by like the throat kind of opening. I'm just curious if that was.
I knew that was going to be the beginning.
Okay.
Because I had sort of set it up in some ways in A Measured Thread. This elderly woman had terminal cancer. She knew that her end was approaching. And she wanted control over it.
I mean, this is a brilliant first line. Isobel considered her options: call 911 or let Maggie die. Well, I mean, shit. Like, right? I mean, how can you not keep reading? What is she going to do? So, but I mean, if you'd read A Measured Thread, we had already, we're kind of in a position to know Maggie's mindset, to know that she wasn't going to be the kind of person who was going to suffer the
indignities
of a long terminal illness ending. Yeah. Yeah. So
Maggie was always, I love Maggie as a character, and she appears in this novel as a voice in Isobel's head. Yeah. Saying, oh, for God's sake. Twat, twat, twat. Get on with your life. I think Maggie is one of those people whom you think she lived a good life. She knew she had a good life, and she was not necessarily ready at the end, but she just looked at the choices and said, well, it's obvious.
Right. Right.
And she had left the people she loved, Vic and Isobel, in a good place. And then she left Isobel with sufficient funds to find out, or try to find out, what was really important to Isobel. Yeah.
And so then the first line of chapter 2, that evening, Isobel quote, discovered, quote, Maggie's body. These are really good first lines of chapters. And by the way,
Okay, so I had the beginning and I had the end. I mean, I really wanted Isobel to be happy. And I love Vic. I think he's a great guy. I mean, he has his downsides, but you know, he's a guy. And I wanted to get her from point A to point Z. But you know, there's a long journey from A to Z.
I mean, yeah, and that line went through New Zealand and then what,
And
Bosnia?
the trouble is, you create a character and you're saddled with the backstory that you gave them in a measured thread. Didn't think about it. I was never going to see Isobel again. So where was she born? Who cared? What was her background? Who cared? She was a tennis athlete. She was doing fine. She was bright. She was going to vet school. Fine. And suddenly I had to revisit
Mhm.
how to get her through these various places. And I'd been to some of them.
Mhm.
And so there's a certain pleasure in the journey because
Sure.
I did not know where each day of that journey was going. I just knew where it would end.
Okay, that makes sense. But actually, I think too that I like to write that way. I like kind of generally knowing where I want to end up, but then letting there be some freedom for the magic of writing, which is like the whole argument between people who plot everything completely out or the ones who write by the seat of their pants, right? So it's an ongoing argument. There's probably some sort of happy medium in there to make it work okay,
Yeah.
so that you don't have to go back and do a ton of editing. I'm curious though, were there things that you wrote about Isobel that you had committed to in the first book that you wished you hadn't done that caused you?
Yes, Sarajevo.
Yeah. Okay.
Isobel, in the first book, I created her as a baby who had been adopted from Sarajevo. If you look at her age, it was during the war in Sarajevo. So if I was going to take her back there to find her real parents, I had to read a lot about
Oh,
the
the
war in
Mhm.
Sarajevo. And that was hard. I mean, you know, there are wars going on right now, and it made me so much more aware of the day-to-day misery
Oh,
of a war.
yeah. Yeah.
And you're pregnant. And you're trying to get on with your ordinary life, but your building has been blown up. And you're going to have to shelter somewhere else. And you have a new baby. Where do you get food?
Right.
You have milk. It's the only thing you have. But you have to barter for everything else.
Mhm.
So that whole experience, that whole background was really hard to go through. And that's one of the things I think in writing that you forget about. You have to crawl into dark places for your writing to be authentic. And as an early writer, I didn't know that. I thought you would slide along the edges, describing this and that. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty cool about trauma and all the nasty deeds he did.
No, but you know, people
It's a good
do
question.
what they think they need to do to survive. And everybody has a different threshold for survival. I didn't expect him to be a war criminal. But when I went along, but of course, that would be the only way I could serve my story. There were so many unexpecteds in writing this book.
That's why Bosnia thing was brilliant.
So, well, you considered it a hurdle in a way because it was made it difficult, but then it made it so much more authentic and like, I don't know, complex.
Yeah.
It made the story more complex, but it was enriching the story, even though it
Yeah.
was like not a fun research project.
No,
So-
and actually, it's ironic. Somebody has asked me more recently, will you write another story? Because we are curious to know what happens in 20 years. And no,
Oh,
no.
no.
Well, I mean, I
No?
probably won't be around in 20 years, that's for starters.
Well,
But to create a life for them, I don't know. Okay, so I don't know if any of you have read Brooklyn, the book Brooklyn. It's an Irish writer and it became a movie.
it's so good.
Yes.
It's so good.
And he just wrote a sequel.
You wrote a sequel?
20 years later.
Oh,
Colin Tobin wrote a sequel called Long Island.
okay. So
It's the Eilish in Long Island 20 years later. It's a brilliant two-go.
is it Saoirse Ronan
It
played?
was in the movie.
Okay, so if you know who she is, she's just fabulous actress. No one can either pronounce or spell her name because it's, the Irish spelling. I recommend them both. It's a beautiful story.
Yeah.
You'll appreciate it if you come from a small town because it's all that sort of thing that happens with small towns, only it's her Irish small town.
Yeah.
And
everybody knows
everybody's
everything.
business. And
There's a hierarchy in a small town
yeah.
as to who your parents, where'd you come from, whatever. But in any case,
Have you read this?
Yeah.
So did it work?
it did, but I didn't like it
You didn't like it.
because it, I want happy. I'm old enough that I want happy endings.
There's not a happy ending.
Let's say it ends on in an ambiguous place.
Sometimes I'm in the mood for stories that can be like that, and sometimes I need a happy ending. It depends on what you've been reading lately or what you're experiencing in your own life, whether you need a happy ending. And
If someone is saying what happens to Isobel,
yeah,
Vic, over the next 20 years, I don't know. I honestly don't know. So I haven't got that in me.
Okay.
So whatever.
Fair enough.
If you have read and left Isobel and Vic in the cabin, smiling at each other and totally thrilled as the dog bounds up to the house, leave it at that. So, people say characters walk in on you. I have to tell you, I don't know where this character came from. I'm sitting in my living room typing away. And this Maori woman with a facial tattoo that is not insignificant and black lips walks in the door. She's slightly lopsided. She's got a moo dress on her and she's wearing millions of bracelets and rings. And she says, sure, they never see the light of day. Well, today they're all seeing the light of day. She has put on every single piece of jewelry she owns. I loved this woman. And I have no idea where she came from.
Well, so write a book about her.
It's interesting because I'd love to write a book about Stan, only, frankly, she's Maori. And it's not that I'm afraid of cultural appropriation.
Yeah,
I mean, how the hell can an Irish person write a book about a New Zealand person? A Maori. I could come up with something, but it wouldn't be authentic.
True.
I can write an authentic Irish person.
You've been getting some really good reviews on this book and some awards already, which is pretty cool. I like the one review that said something about literary elegance.
That blew me away. I didn't feel it.
Congrats.
Yeah.
So a lot of times when we write, we just write what we're writing and we're not thinking about themes, where people say, well, what are the themes that you write about? And it's all this high-minded, and you're like, I don't know, you have to think about it a little bit. You don't set out to start with the theme. But somebody was talking about the combination, I think this was the Midwest Book Review, women's domestic life combined with global travel or whatever. And I was like, those are two types of themes that are not normally combined.
Yeah.
But it was sort of the push-pull between those two.
Yeah.
In a way.
And I didn't have a theme in writing this. The themes could be the feeling of abandonment.
Yes.
But I didn't want to plug that because, no, I don't see it as a book about abandonment. I just see it as, like every story, there's a quest.
Yes.
Somebody has a
Yes.
desire to find out about, or learn, or get to a place where they feel better.
Right.
So I don't have any highfalutin theme in this book.
Well, I mean, and I guess other people have identified your themes, right? Like belonging and your path forward in life, or like she kind of maybe stunted in a way, like she's feeling like she doesn't have a path forward till she resolves it. So it's the belonging or resolution,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
and it is sort of an abandonment. Like she has to uncover that, like what that is.
But I don't see her as a victim.
No, she's not a victim. I don't think she's a victim. I think she's more,
She's confused.
right.
She's
Mhm.
angry. And in some ways, she's challenged. Every time she thinks she has just got it right, she ends up with Toma, a father who is a real father, whom she wanted to be the Gregory Peck, whatever out there. And he's not. He is a very damaged man.
Well, right. And there's all these secrets. So all these secrets are swirling around. And she had these like kind of, distant adoptive parents who took care of her, physical needs and whatever. Like she had what she, how she had, but she never really had the love that she needed.
And
in a
you
way.
learn how it would be. I have to tell you a story. This is, when you write a book, you're looking for blurbs. When you finish the book, you want somebody to write something nice about your book that you can quote them and say, this person who writes thought this was a good book. So I approached a total stranger. She writes novels. She's a well-known American novelist.
Is it Maggie?
No,
Yes,
no. Somebody you don't know. And I went, I just sort of went, okay. I like her profile. She sounds a bit like me. She lives in the middle of nowhere in Massachusetts. She writes interesting novels with characters who have quests. Fine, I'll approach her. Why not? I mean, I did start way at the top, Isobel Allende, but Isobel Allende is not writing blurbs for people like me. And I don't blame her. She's in her 80s.
You have to ask. If you don't ask, you can't get a yes. So.
Yeah. And I really admire Isobel Allende. So in any case, this woman got back to me and said, well, I need to know more about you and about the book and yada, yada. And I think you should be reading my books and writing stuff about them and putting it on Facebook and Instagram. Okay, there's a quid pro quo, but I don't know about this thing. So I read the book, I like it, and it's well written, and I write something on Instagram and Facebook, and fine. She's willing then, 4 months hence, to read my book. I send it to her, and a week later I get a note back from her saying, I can't blurb this. Adoptive parents never behave like that. There is no way this would happen. And I don't know. I was just, I think she only read the first maybe 4 chapters. And I was really hurt and shocked by her adamant refusal to go beyond that single feeling. And I got the impression from her letter that she either had adopted or she was adopted. And I stepped back and just said, I appreciate your situation. Thank you. And let it go.
Yeah, it triggered her. It triggered her. One of my books it's a middle grade novel, but it's on the topic of domestic abuse. And there were a few people I asked for blurbs who just gently sidestepped it because they couldn't.
Yeah,
they couldn't do it.
Understand?
Yeah. So I mean, I'm guessing that's what happened.
Yeah.
But I mean, good for you for reaching out and trying and stuff. I've recently done that with some mystery writers, and I've gotten some surprising reactions that are very positive.
Good.
And some people sidestep it. I mean, these are like best-selling authors and they'll say, I mean, I'm not allowed to do it, or my publisher asks that I don't. But I've also had other things happen where someone has said to me, send me the book. I might blurb it. I won't say their name here because gets recorded, but I'm offering you a blog, I guess, blog post on a really, really famous blog that gets thousands of readers a week. So
Yeah.
there's other wins. There's other wins there.
Yeah.
And generally authors at any level of
Are
success,
supportive.
they're very supportive and kind and curious about other people's journey. And it's interesting that there's less competition than there might be, I think, from other like career areas. It just doesn't seem to be, that level of like the pie is only so big, in
Right.
terms of readers, that it seems it's a very generous spirit.
Yes,
Yeah.
I would say absolutely.
Yeah. So interesting though. Huh.
Yeah, because I never expected that. And I almost felt badly that I had asked her for this because I put her in a situation where I hurt her in some ways.
Well, if she had read your cover copy though, which she had, she knew it was about.
Yeah.
But it was the portrayal of the adoptive parents
In the beginning,
that
they are so cold.
they are.
And as the book goes on, you understand where they came from.
Yes.
And they evolve. That's another thing in writing. I mean, your characters evolve. You didn't expect them to evolve, but they do. And I suppose it reflects that you have evolved in seeing your characters. There's a pleasure in that.
There really is. There really is. And so, especially if you're writing like this is going to just be 2 books, but if you're writing series, I bet that's so much fun for authors, even if it's like a mystery series, but you've got, your main detective or sleuth, and you've got like personality traits and things that happen to them in their life and whatever. I mean, it's like they're real people to us.
Oh God, you have no idea how real they become. I mean, seriously, the book I've started working on now, I have to give people names. I mean,
That's the best part. I love naming people.
And then, well, this is historical fiction, so I have to think, would they have used that name in whatever?
This is where I go down the rabbit hole on baby names. Baby names popular in 1853.
It's hilarious. Right. Or what did a telephone look like in 1933? It was black, it was Bakelite, and it did not have a dial thing. That came, I learned today, in 1936. So there.
So how did you call out?
Operator. Yeah.
Operator?
Operator. Yeah.
And then the operator came on?
Yeah.
And then you said who you wanted to call?
Yeah.
And
Cool.
they listened.
That was as recent as the 30s?
And it's to their neighbors.
Oh, yeah. Well, we had a party line. Yeah, our line would chirp slightly when it rang through to the other 2 people.
Did you ever hear anything interesting?
We weren't allowed to, but my mother does, she's listening to that person.
But I love that kind of stuff about book research, though. I think that's fun.
Well, okay, so for all of these books, I've done a little research, but the one that I'm writing now is historical fiction. I've never written historical fiction. Why not? And so it starts in 1867
Okay.
in Norway. And it is an immigrant story. They were dirt poor and they were emigrating. When you start to dissect what it was like, that you had no chance of surviving in Norway. And in this case, his father's factory burns down and there's nothing. And so, of course, you emigrate. And there's a cousin. There's always a cousin or an uncle who got to America before you. And if you can get to Janesville, Wisconsin,
That's awesome.
it'll give you a job.
I love it.
And you have to step back and try to put yourself in the mindset of a 14-year-old boy who's climbing on a ship with a bag. And that's it. And what's in it? A Bible, because he's a Norwegian Lutheran kid. And his school teacher shoves in an English book, how to speak English.
Mhm.
And you just, you know, it hits you at times how amazing it is for people to do things like this.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And how I mean, just
Except that you didn't have any option.
no. So you do what you have to do.
Yeah.
But the idea of someone that young too, unaccompanied, whatever. So
Yeah, so this is,
how far along are you with it?
okay, well, that 300 words a day. Let's go back to that. I went to an Irish writing workshop.
Oh, you had the most amazing summer.
I did.
Oh my gosh. Just,
writing.
oh no.
No, I went to,
This-
so obviously I'm Irish. And I have still got relatives on the west coast of Ireland in a place called Achill Island.
I love
And so
lovely place.
I went for an Irish festival. It was to celebrate a writer from Germany, actually, a Nobel laureate, who Heinrich Boll, who had written a lot, staying in a little house on Achill in the, let's see, 1950s, thereabouts. And my cousin happens to live on this island, and every year they have a festival, which is actually basically a booze up. You know, they do talk about writing, but they do a lot of drinking. There's music. And then you go on hikes to see birds and to look at archaeological ruins, stuff like that. It was great fun. So that was the beginning of May. And at the end of May, I went to a workshop. This was serious. I committed to spending a week with 7 other writers and 2 leaders. An American, very well-known novelist, Alice McDermott. She's a beautiful writer. She was leading it, and Jackie Lydon is the other leader, who actually lives kind of Oconomowoc walk away.
Yeah.
And used to work for National Public Radio as a journalist. So these were the 2 guides, but critics as well. And every day was serious writing in the morning, and your piece would be critiqued in the afternoon with a discussion with everyone. But the location was fabulous, and every night you went to the pub. You ate
As one does.
as one does. But it was just such a wonderful experience.
Were you in Connemara?
No, we were in Mayo.
Oh, Mayo. So
County
one
Mayo.
county north.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Nice.
Yes.
It sounded lovely.
And
I was
so
very jealous.
Started the book there, and I didn't get very far. I got maybe the first 20 pages
Okay.
because, of course, it was critiqued and critiqued and critiqued. And I came back home and did nothing for a couple of months.
Nothing.
And then I had to go back to writing. Some people are very disciplined. I'm not. So going back to it meant climbing into the hold of a small 3-masted ship coming from Norway to Quebec in 1867, and the rudder gets sheared off. By the way, this did happen to the person I started to base this story on. And instead of 6 weeks, it was 12 weeks. And they starved. And 20 of the 60 passengers died. And I just didn't want to crawl back into that hold and live with them. So I put it aside, and it's still aside.
Oh, you'll circle back to that.
I'll get to it. So I wrote chapter 2. That was easier. Successful, arrived, made a career, building a house, happy families. And then I'm now in chapter 3. And I'm jumping a decade in each
what
chapter.
fun. What a fun
Because I want-
structure.
Wisconsin, decade by decade by decade. And I want Madison, decade by decade by decade. So right now, the immigrant is on his deathbed, and his 3 daughters, Goneril Regan, and whoever the third one was in King Lear. Well, those three girls are, let's say they're all looking for what they're going to get. And it's not happy families. That's where I am
So this is
this afternoon.
so this is a family saga, because you're gonna then follow the next generation.
It's a multi-generational family saga set in Madison, Wisconsin.
That's wonderful.
I'm taking it chapter by chapter because it's hard to jump from 10 years to 10 years to 10 years and think
Mhm.
what. So my husband is an historian, and I'm saying to him, what happened in Madison, Wisconsin in
And does
1920?
Mr. Tim know what happened? He does
He usually
probably.
has something
Yeah.
to tell me. And whether you could have a bank account, I mean, the things I'm learning, whether you could have a bank account, whether you could get a mortgage on a house, whether you could, I just hadn't thought about these
It's
things.
before the crash, because that was 1929.
Actually, the chapter I'm writing now is post-crash.
Ah.
So how did it affect people who were comfortable and thought everything was perfect?
Right.
And suddenly.
Right, because it didn't affect everyone, of course, equally.
Yeah.
Right.
And so
And so in these three sisters who are vying for their father's estate, it didn't affect them equally.
are there any brothers?
No,
Aha.
three girls. So I'm having fun. And it's funny because in the middle of the night you'll get those 3 hours of wakefulness where everyone in your brain is talking to you about their story. Now
Do you get up to
represent
write?
it. No, I
No.
don't.
Okay.
I put it aside and say, chances are, if it's good, it'll be there tomorrow.
That's actually a really good way to look at it. Also, it allows you the chance of actually getting back to sleep and not being up. It's so bad, isn't it? I am curious about, whether or not anyone else has ever asked you about like the terminally ill theme and, the right to
Take your own life.
to end your life on the note with which you wish to exit.
Yes.
Has that come up in other interviews or conversations?
No, it hasn't come up in interviews. However, I do hang out with a bunch of old women. And as I say, the yoga ladies have very frank conversations about issues like this. Several of my friends are widows,
Mhm.
and that prompts these conversations when we're all living out the country and most of us are living, some of us are living alone. And so we do have to think, particularly some of us who don't have children. And if you're an immigrant, it just adds one more piece to the issue. So I have those conversations and I have always felt comfortable with them. I'm a scientist. It's easy, I think, for me to step back and just say, I am only part of a massive universe and I haven't a clue what's going to happen next. But I'm positive enough to think it'll be an adventure. So, yeah, many women are more comfortable
Mhm.
with those conversations than men.
Mhm.
And in Isobel, many issues that are challenging for some people are front and center. There's suicide,
Mhm.
there's abortion,
Mhm.
there's war criminality, there's difficult choices
Yes.
and situations where you have to put your life aside and get on with dealing
Well,
with life.
it's life.
Yes.
It's
It is
reality and the confrontation of
So I'm well, not even comfortable. I actually feel good about having raised many of these issues
Mhm.
because they're in the back of our minds. And I don't want us to be afraid to present them. If we don't throw them out there. Oh, I did. I can see Lara there. And by the way, This is not the Lara who's Lara in my book, but I did steal her name
There's a whole crew.
and her mom.
I was just curious, like if other people had brought up, because it's one of those things that people have strong feelings one way or the
Yeah.
other about usually. I mean,
I think I get away with a lot because, my profile says I'm a neuroscientist. I have basically taught and explored science all of my career. And it does allow you to say with authority, I have thought about this.
yes. Yes.
I come from Ireland. Obviously, I come from a strong Catholic background. I have thought about this. I have spent many years on my knees. I have thought about this.
Do we have other questions? Mary?
So is New Zealand as arbitrary as Yugoslavia?
No. I've been to New Zealand several times. So way back in a piece of kernels, I was living in Holland and I met a couple from New Zealand and they became very good friends. So I visited them several times and Tim and I have visited them together. And then we've been to New Zealand ourselves a couple of times. So I love it as a country. And I indulged myself in the first book, In a Measured Thread. I sent the parents off to New Zealand because one was from New Zealand. That was a convenience. But it allowed me to go back to New Zealand in Finding Isobel. And I enjoyed it so much. Anyone, if you're thinking of writing, write, because you can have so much fun. You can, by the way, the cabin in both books, A Measured Thread and Finding Isobel, and particularly in Finding Isobel, the log cabin is my log cabin. However, I do not have in-floor heating. I wrote about it. I lusted after it, but I didn't have a Vic. And so, it's funny how you can cure or remediate things in books that are not happening in your real life. I do have the benches out on the prairie,
Yes.
and I have the prairie.
Yes. Do you have a goal date for finishing the next book? Or are you just
Absolutely not.
okay? I kind of knew that answer before I asked it. So
I do.
you know the ending?
Actually, I know the ending
Mhm.
because it's really the story of the house that this multi-generational family lives in. And it's the house he builds the house of his dreams, the immigrant. And it's his family living in this house. So the house is always the basis where people come and go. And
I
in
like
the
that.
end,
I like that.
this house
Mhm.
becomes too big, too expensive, too impossible. So I couldn't leave it to fall into ruin. And right now, in my mind at least, this house is going to be bought by a youngish couple with children who want to run a B&B. So I can give the house a new life. And at least right now, I'm really happy with that solution. And it'll be around 2010. It'll be before COVID, because I don't want them to be ruined by COVID.
That's a really interesting challenge to write that long of a saga, a family saga. That's fun.
Yeah.
How are you keeping track? Well, are you at the point where you're having to use like a spreadsheet for the characters and stuff? Because you're obviously going to have lots and lots of names and
Today, I created 3 new names. I gave birth to 3 children. It wasn't very exhausting. I just had to come up with names. And so that's got, and then I was thinking, okay, well, she's going to have miscarriages because I really don't want to come up with any more names, which is a terrible thing to say, but you can do this in books. And one of them is 4 children. I'm not ready to name them yet. So it's that kind of thing.
that's one of my absolutely most favorite things about writing is that I get to name characters. I don't know. It's like
I haven't got a
it's-
surname yet. Oh, none of them has surnames.
Oh, well,
Okay,
that's a problem.
right.
I don't know, but I had to keep track eventually with my series because you know, you think you haven't used a name, but you've used it for some minor character somewhere, and you're like, oh, I did use that. And now you feel like you've wasted the name on like someone who was in one scene, and you
Oh,
didn't even need to name the person, but you named them.
the protagonist, I picked a name. I loved it. It's not the name of the man it's based on, whom, if I mention his name, some of you might actually have heard of him. So I picked a name, Anders. Anders is a good Norwegian name. It sounded great. I love it. I have a very good friend
Yes.
in writing, local writing, whose character is called Anders.
Is it Larry Summers? Yeah, Larry was here with his book.
Oh, then I thought,
Yep.
well, shit.
Like that means
I am going to have to rename my Anders, whom I've got really fond of as Anders.
Aw,
And I'm
Larry wouldn't
searching-
mind.
Well, by the time it comes out, it'll be 3 years hence. Nobody
Yeah.
will remember his Anders. Well, they might, but I was thinking Leaf. Now, Leaf is a nice name.
Leaf years.
Leaf, like Leif Erikson. But at present, he is still Anders, and we'll see what happens to him in 3 years' time.
All right then.
He may metamorphose.
Do we have more questions for Mary?
Are you doing anything on Audible?
On
Audible. Audio.
So, Finding Isobel is an audiobook, and Measured Thread is an audiobook. I narrate both of them
Which
in
is
a strong Irish accent. I can't do New Zealand. I can't do Maori. I can't do Sarajevo. It's Irish. But I also narrated with my sister, Abbey Girls. It was great fun with Abbey Girls because my sister and I were in the studio together,
Mhm.
each talking our letter.
Some authors, particularly either if you are hiring your own voice talent or you are your own voice talent, then you need a place to record and then have somebody create the audio files for you. So they're like the producer. Other options include using narrators who are also the producer. And then they usually have a home studio and you hire them and pay them, per hour, per finished hour. So what the book ends up being like a 10-hour book, you pay them for the 10 finished hours and stuff. So you did it the more complicated way.
Except he did everything. I just walked in there, opened the book and read.
But it's
exhausting.
It is, and people think it's going to be easy to read and narrate, and to read it the way you need to read it for that presentation that works for audiobook listeners isn't like just reading it.
No, it takes a huge
It's like
amount
kind
of
of-
energy.
Kind of like acting it in a way.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm impressed that you did your own narration. That's good. I think that's fun.
Well,
I'm impressed. I wouldn't do it
it was
myself.
an
So
experience.
yeah.
And certainly for a Measured Thread, it needed an Irish voice. It's an old
Yeah.
Irish woman.
Yeah.
So that worked. Isabel, I don't know. But so what? You get me.
You mentioned you had a book of short stories.
Yes.
Do you have a preference as far as writing short stories or novels?
That's a great question. And I have to tell you, when I'd finished writing Finding Isobel, second novel, I was itching to go back to writing short stories because they're short. And I know I can write one in a month and send it out to a bunch of people and say, what did you think? And tidy it up in a couple of weeks. And I have a product. Whereas this novel took 3 years. So in the new novel, I'm cheating. I'm writing a novella that will get Anders from Norway to Wisconsin. It will take 50 or 60 pages. It's not an easy journey. It's a cheat on a novel, a novella, and then each chapter thereafter is in a decade.
Mhm.
And it concerns a different family member. It's a short story.
It really is, isn't it?
And so I'm allowing myself both. I don't know if it's going to work. I mean, when I finish it, I'll give it to my editor and say, what do you think? And she's very good and very
Well, she'll
critical.
tell you.
And she'll tell
Yeah.
you. We both know Christine well. And it may be that she says, well, 1930 works. 1970, I have no idea why this is a story. You know, it'll be something like that.
Mhm.
And I'll go back and maybe write a totally different story for that decade, but I'll be better at it then.
Mhm.
Yeah. So
That is a good question, though.
it's,
Yeah.
I like both, but right now I haven't the energy for a whole story that takes up 270 pages with just 2 or 3 or 4 characters. Yeah.
So way back when I was at the beginning of writing, and I took an online course with Marshall Cook. So that was UW-Madison.
Yeah,
Do
yeah.
you remember Marshall?
Yeah.
Okay. And I've told the story before in here, and how I was kind of like, oh, you know, I don't know if I can like write a novel. I've only been doing short stories. And Marshall was kind of like, you know, knock off the whining. But basically, you've already been writing chapters. Like if you treat every chapter like a short story, you will end up having a book. I mean,
Yeah.
there are other considerations in there, but it was really good advice for someone who was like nervous about the concept of a whole book of like how many thousand words, you know,
Yeah,
like 100,000 words just seems daunting,
Yeah.
you know?
By the way, I do have to say, one of the reasons this got finished is Valerie, because we did NaNoWriMo together. So National Novel Writing Month
Yeah.
is set in November every year. And the goal is that you will write 50,000 words of a novel in November. And I'd written 15,000 words, and I wanted to finish this book. And I needed impetus. And Valerie and another friend of ours, Sylvia Acevedo,
You guys know Sylvia, if you've been here for some of her books a
and
while
the
back.
3 of us did it. We wrote down every night our word count. We confessed.
We had a shared Google
our
calendar.
word count. And every week we would go online together and say, and you could bitch at any time about any part of your day.
Right.
And it was wonderful.
It was super helpful to have an accountability,
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
you know,
And
partners.
at the
or
end
whatever.
of it, we had all achieved our goal.
Mhm.
We all finished our novels.
And we had different, all of us had a start of
Yeah.
a novel, and we just had been fiddling around the edges of it and needed just kind of a kick in the butt, really,
Yeah.
to get it done. And then that tight time frame worked.
Right.
I mean, it won't always work,
No.
but
So we have talked about this November, the
Mhm.
3 of us, and we're giving ourselves the challenge of, let's say, NaNoWriMo Light,
yeah, that's what we're calling it.
LITE. In other words, maybe 20,000 words. We're not doing the daily word count.
No, we're just gonna,
We're just going to talk at least once a week and say, okay, how's it going?
Yeah.
Right.
That'll help though, because, and then I'll be through my book launches and I'll be able to refocus on something new, and I'll be really like,
You'd be enthusiastic.
yeah. And I'm kind of sad because I haven't been writing. I mean, there's only so many hours in a day, right? You can't do
Yeah.
everything. Before we finish up, I want to talk to you about your covers real quick, because this is not super typical that you actually go to an artist, not a cover artist, an artist to get paintings. So she did this one too. So this one having the little house kind of on it, you know, it's very kind of
House on the
impressionistic.
prairie.
This makes sense a lot for the first book, right? I
She's
love
from
this.
Wanakee, this artist. And I saw this picture hanging in my local coffee shop in Cross Plains and thought that'd make a good cover. So I
And-
contacted her and she sold me the painting, and
Mhm.
that was that. And so time moved on. And when it came to this one, I contacted her and said, do you have anything? Well, actually, I went online. She has become quite famous.
Mhm.
She has huge pieces in Chicago in a gallery for thousands
Beautiful.
of dollars. And I kind of went, oh my God, what happened? And she said, COVID happened. Everybody
So she was
wanted
so
those walls
creative.
adorned with the great outdoors. And so she was doing big pieces. And I said, I'm kind of looking for a little piece. And she said, I've just finished one. It's called Finding Joy. That's it, Finding Joy. And it's tiny. It's maybe 8 by 8. And she said, I won't sign it yet because I want you to be able to use any
The whole
part of
image,
it.
yeah.
And so that's it.
I think the texture of it is so nice, but book cover design is tricky. It's always tricky, but to have something that is this beautiful.
Oh, and that
you know.
means so much to
Yeah.
me. Yes.
Yeah. Oh, her name's Gina Hecht.
Gina Hecht, Hecht, and you'll find her online. And she does,
Yep, she's just ginahecht.com. And
Yeah. and she does, I don't know how you describe them, these. But they're not specific, they're sort of amorphous.
Mhm.
And you recognize things of the great outdoors in them, but you couldn't say, was that a lily or a tulip? That kind of thing.
Well, I think she's brilliant. And I've been on her website and I like all the things she does. I
Yeah.
mean,
And she's local.
which is even more fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
That it's somebody else creative in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
But I wanted to bring that up just because it's unique and you just don't see that kind of quality art.
Yeah.
I mean, you see great covers, but you don't always have actual real like
People.
art, like creating.
And she came to my launch party, which was
Mhm.
a party in Cross Plains in my local.
It was a
coffee
nice
shop.
party.
It was a great party.
It really was.
Yeah.
Thank
I am so
Thank you, thank you,
grateful
thank you.
for you all coming. I mean, you come because it's your book club. But for me, it's a wonderful audience and I get to talk about something that I love doing.
It's
So,
a
Read it.
it's a perfect combination.
yes, it
Um,
is. With a marvelous hostess.
It's fun. We could talk forever.
I know,
We really could.
but we
uh,
better stop.
We better stop. I mean,